Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction horror TV series named Manifest, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with the commercial Flight 828, which took off on April 7, 2013, bound for New York. It seemed everything was normal on the flight, but after traveling some distance, it suddenly experienced severe turbulence, leaving the passengers in a state of distress and concern. During this episode, the power temporarily failed, but was quickly restored to normal. The pilot, finding no abnormalities, prepared to contact ground control for landing. However, the ground control requested the passenger count and flight number, and then instructed the pilot to divert to a standby airport. Though puzzled, the pilot complied. Upon landing, people found their cell phones had no signal. Just as the plane came to a halt, a slew of police cars rushed to the scene. All passengers were directed to gather in a square. They were clueless about what had occurred. At this point, an agent from the National Security Agency named Robert approached and informed them that while their flight took off on April 7, 2013, it was now November 4, 2018. To every passenger's shock, they then realized that they had been missing for 5.5 years and were declared dead. The passengers were left baffled. It felt like the flight they boarded had only lasted 3 hours, yet 5 years had passed. The passengers on board were totally unaware of this anomaly. After questioning passengers, the authorities concluded that, apart from the turbulence, there were no anomalies found on these missing passengers. Flight 828, which disappeared 5 years ago, has resurfaced and become a hot topic nationwide. Many people believe that the survivors possess supernatural powers that allowed the plane to return intact after 5 years. 5 years is long enough for many things to happen and many destinies to change. A police officer on the flight named Michaela was picked up by her colleague, who told her that her position in the police station had been taken by someone else. Now, to get it back, she had to go through various procedures. And what's more, she soon learned that her police boyfriend, Jared, had now shockingly married her friend since her disappearance. Michaela was left with a bitter taste. Just 3 hours ago, before the flight, she and Jared were discussing their own marriage, and now her boyfriend Jared was someone else's husband. But that wasn't the worst of it. Since returning, Michaela had been feeling off. A voice in her head would periodically give her instructions. For instance, when on a bus, the voice told her to tell the driver to slow down. She hesitated for a while but chose to do as instructed, and as a result, a child who dashed out was saved. As Michaela passed by a place the other day, a mysterious voice in her head asked her to release them. She initially thought it referred to some dogs that were locked up. It wasn't until the second time when she followed the voice and found a locked door. She knocked the door open, only to find 2 girls trapped inside. It turned out these were the same individuals who had been reported missing by the police a couple of days earlier. Such occurrences weren't limited to Michaela. Her brother Ben, who was on the flight with his son Cal, also heard a mysterious voice in his head from time to time. Indeed, anyone who was on that plane seemed somewhat off. For unknown reasons, these passengers were all mysteriously drawn to the plane by the mysterious voice. As they stood looking at each other and then at the Flight 828, a sudden explosion rang out. The plane that caused all these mysteries was blown to ashes. After the incident, the NSA once again gathered everyone as surveillance footage captured them at the scene. They wanted to know what had happened and why the plane exploded inexplicably, but they still came away with nothing. As they were leaving, Agent Robert warned that this matter pertained to the NSA and they would continue to investigate. In recent days, music kept playing in Ben's mind, leading him to find another fellow passenger from the plane. The old man's son was imprisoned for theft, but he was convinced his son was innocent. However, due to their undocumented status, the police were not planning to investigate. Knowing that Ben's sister worked at the police station, the man hoped for his assistance. They were now in the same predicament, so Ben was happy to help his fellow passenger. After discussing the situation with his sister, Michaela, Ben asked her to investigate as soon as possible. Ever since they returned, they had been very accurate in their feelings. They didn't want to miss out on helping any good person, even if they were undocumented. Ben's troubles didn't stop there. During the 5 years he was gone, his wife, Grace, found another man. She just hadn't told him yet. She didn't know what to say. Their daughter, Olive, loved her new dad, but also loved Ben. It's just that after more than 5 years of not seeing each other, they were a bit distant. Ben was trying hard to rekindle their father-daughter intimacy. While Olive was showing him old family items, they accidentally bumped into the son of the robbed jewelry store owner. It turned out that the fellow passenger's son was framed, and the real thief was the jewelry store owner's son. Thanks to Ben, the man and his son finally reunited. Just as this issue was resolved, another incident occurred. A woman who was also a passenger on the plane was reported having been killed at home. It's said that she had appeared on TV voicing her concerns, wondering if the authorities were hiding something behind the incident. She believed someone wasn't telling the whole truth. Upon hearing this, Ben and the others were scared, wondering if the authorities were targeting the survivors. Meanwhile, another passenger from the plane, Sanvi, a doctor, noticed an anomaly in Ben's son during a casual checkup. It was something she had never seen before. Since Cal already had health issues and was undergoing long-term treatment, she promised to inform Ben of any significant findings. Michaela was trying to crack the mysterious death of the female passenger, wondering if it was related to the voices in their heads. As they couldn't openly investigate, they had to do it together. It concerned their lives, and they might be next. In the end, it was Michaela's ex-boyfriend Jared who helped. He showed that the deceased female passenger had substantial real estate, including a mall and other sizable entertainment businesses. Michaela immediately took Ben to the mall. From an employee, they learned that the female passenger had been acting strangely since her return. A voice in her head told her to shut down all their businesses and lead a quiet life with her husband. With this information, the husband became the prime suspect, because it was unlikely he'd let the business he worked so hard to build be destroyed by his wife. After investigating, Jared found out that the husband was a thorough rogue involved in kidnapping and extortion. However, there was no evidence to prove he killed his wife. In the evening, Michaela planned to visit the parents of her bestie, who had died a few years before in a car accident while Michaela was driving. Her bestie's mother had fallen ill as a result and often left home alone. This time was no exception, so Michaela hurriedly drove to find her, only to encounter another accident. A car was about to hit her bestie's mother, and without thinking, Michaela accelerated to shield her. When she saw the necklace of the deceased female passenger on the seat, she instantly understood what had happened. The driver was actually the deceased's housekeeper and the killer. Michaela had solved 2 cases consecutively without any premonition, and Jared suspected that she was hiding something, but she wouldn't say. Meanwhile, Dr. Sanvi made progress on her side. She discovered that she had the same anomaly in her brain as Ben's son. To her, it was a type of ischemia because they had been close to death on the plane. Time had passed 5 years in the blink of an eye, halting their metabolism, which was now starting again. This was similar to a stroke. To uncover the truth, they needed to find and analyze the deceased female passenger's body, but it had been taken away by the NSA, who were also trying to figure out what had happened on the plane over the past 5 years. After this, strange things started happening in Sanvi's mind. She saw watermarks on the ground and was shocked to find a clay figure in front of her, but no one else could see it. To confirm her suspicions, Sanvi sought the best professor who, after examining her, said it was just a hallucination. He mentioned a psychiatric patient with a similar brain distribution and symptoms like anxiety and illusions. As Sanvi left the professor's office, she saw water footprints again, and a man appeared from a door, murmuring "flight attendant," before he was sedated by a nurse. This man was the psychiatric patient the professor had mentioned, named Thomas. At the same time, Michaela received a mission. An undercover cop had made progress with a gang and planned to take them all down that night. Michaela and Jared were teamed up to handle the operation. Suddenly, Michaela heard a voice in her head, believing that the undercover cop was in trouble. She asked Jared to order an immediate breakthrough, which resulted in a gunfight. The undercover cop was furious. He was close to taking down the whole gang, and Michaela had ruined everything before he could signal. After the incident, Jared took all the blame. He didn't want Michaela to get into trouble. To find out the truth, Sanvi sought the flight attendant Thomas had mentioned. The flight attendant revealed that Thomas was her cousin's lover, who, without a passport, had been smuggled, making Thomas a stowaway on Flight 828. Meanwhile, Ben received a call saying his daughter Olive had been caught shoplifting. When Ben arrived at the store, he saw Olive's new dad. After Olive was caught, she didn't call her father, but her new dad, showing how deep their bond had grown over the past 5 years. Ben felt like an outsider. His daughter and even his wife seemed like strangers now. He wondered what he had done wrong. He had inexplicably lost 5 years, and when he finally returned home, it was no longer the home he knew. Officer Jared's hasty command led to a failed operation, resulting in his suspension pending an investigation. Michaela felt a pang of sadness, wondering if the voice in her head could be evil. She decided to talk to Dr. Sanvi, but ran into her midway. Sanvi and the flight attendant were looking for the stowaway Thomas, who had escaped from the psychiatric hospital and been found in front of a statue. This statue was the figure they had seen in their minds. To avoid surveillance by the NSA, they retreated to a secluded location where they could be safe for a while. Afterwards, Ben warned Michaela not to listen to the voice in her head anymore, as that would only lead her deeper into trouble. Michaela retorted that this might all be a mistake, but they didn't really have a choice. Even if they didn't investigate themselves, the NSA wouldn't let them go. Ben didn't want to get involved in their affairs. Having already lost 5 years of his life, he just wanted to spend quality time with his family. If things continued this way, it would inevitably lead to disaster. Seeing the situation, the flight attendant decided to take Thomas away. She had a concealed house that the NSA would probably not find. She didn't want to bother Michaela and the others anymore. Michaela criticized her brother Ben for being unsympathetic. They were all in the same boat, and they would become the next targets. However, Ben was adamant about not getting involved anymore. On the NSA's side, Agent Robert was frustrated by the slow investigation progress. He demanded that efforts be intensified to find Thomas. Meanwhile, Jared was in constant trouble. Ever since he took the blame for Michaela, he had been under investigation by the police, but he didn't care. He would do anything for Michaela. Fortunately, his boss managed to save his job, but on one condition: that he had to tell him everything about Michaela. Jared obviously wouldn't agree. Today was a day for Ben to spend alone with his son, Cal. Both of them had experienced the ordeal of the plane accident. Cal suggested going to play on a small island, and they had a wonderful time. When it was time to go home, Cal insisted on taking the subway and ran off before Ben could respond. Ben chased after him, fearing for his safety, but gradually noticed something strange. Cal seemed to be guided by someone and was heading straight for Thomas's hiding place. Ben found it very strange. This place was known to very few people. How did Cal know about it? At the same time, just as the flight attendant was about to find Thomas away, Agent Robert from the NSA arrived and took her instead. Her friend came to inform Thomas and took him away. This was all orchestrated by the flight attendant. After this incident, Ben decided to investigate thoroughly because now his son was also involved. It seemed as if some mysterious force was guiding the passengers on the plane to do something. That night, Cal suddenly started shouting in an unfamiliar language. His mother measured his temperature, and it was already a highly dangerous situation. They immediately took him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find the cause of his fever. Cal was also suffering from cancer, so they couldn't afford to take any random medications, and the previous treatment plan couldn't be used recklessly. Suddenly, Cal started rambling some strange phrases again. Sanvi, upon hearing this, felt a sense of familiarity, as if she had heard it somewhere before. After a bit of thought, she realized it was something she had heard on the plane. Then Cal burst out with, "Help me!" This was no coincidence. There was a man on the plane, and now Cal was saying the same words as him. Ben checked the picture. It was a man named Marco, who had been asking people to fill out a form on the plane. Oddly, Ben couldn't find any information about this man. Sanvi remembered a woman who had helped him fill out the form. When Michaela found the woman, she said Marco's words meant, "Help me," the same as what Cal had said. But what did he need help with? No one knew, unless Marco himself told them. The woman said Marco had left on a bus to a refuge provided by the government. This was strange, as Michaela had only found records of 4 buses leaving in the NSA system. There was no 5th bus, but the woman insisted there was a 5th bus. She had seen it with her own eyes. Furthermore, Ben found that 11 flight passengers were missing, presumably taken away by this 5th bus. The authorities were definitely hiding something. These missing people were either without family or foreigners, so their disappearance wouldn't attract attention. Just then, Cal started raving again. Ben quickly used a device to record his words, but what Cal said was baffling. At some distant location, Marco is uttering the same words. Wires protrude from his head. His expression is of extreme agony. Michaela has uncovered new information. A 5th bus disappeared without a trace immediately after entering the border road. There's not a single trace to be found. After extensive searching, Ben concludes that the bus is definitely hidden somewhere. There should be many fields nearby, and only a few places could potentially hide a bus. Therefore, Michaela asked Jared to join her in a secret investigation of the missing bus. Despite Jared's reluctance, his love for Michaela compels him to go along. Cal's condition is deteriorating further, and in a strange twist, so is Marco's. A group of mysterious people are experimenting on him. Why Cal and Marco are linked remains a mystery. Michaela and Jared search numerous locations but find nothing unusual. Just when they are on the verge of giving up, a farm suddenly appears before them, heavily guarded. Clearly, something is amiss. A car speeds towards them. Michaela quickly deflates its tires with a tool, pretending that their car got a flat while passing by. As they leave, they spot a door. It's the same red door Cal mentioned earlier. The woman who comes out seems familiar. Michaela takes a photo and leaves. Cal's condition worsens, and the doctor gives the final notice. Either try antibiotics or keep waiting. If they use antibiotics, the previous cancer treatments will become ineffective. It's a choice between antibiotics and treating cancer. Cal's mother wants to use the antibiotics immediately, but Ben disagrees. He suspects that Cal's problem isn't physical, but linked to Marco. He asks Grace to trust him this time. This isn't a simple medical issue, but she thinks Ben has lost his mind. Their son is in a critical condition, and Ben is talking about an airplane. Nonetheless, Ben insists, asking Grace to give him an hour. He believes he can get some information from the NSA agent Robert, but Ben's hopes are dashed. After he explains everything he knows, Robert is left flabbergasted. They never detained 11 passengers, and they have no idea where Marco is. After Ben leaves, Robert falls into deep thought. Is someone else handling this case? Where have the missing 11 passengers gone? Upon her return, Michaela finds explosive information. The farm they recently visited was bank-owned 2 weeks ago, and now a company named Unified Dynamics has bought it. This company seems to collaborate regularly with officials and clearly is up to something. Robert sends people to investigate the missing passengers list and finds that it matches Ben's list. Wanting to figure out who is manipulating everything behind the scenes, he decides to go check out the mysterious farm. But by the time they arrive, it's already been cleared out. All they find is a torn piece of an item on the ground. Meanwhile, Cal temporarily stabilizes. Everyone else assumes the ordeal is over, but Ben thinks it's only a temporary reprieve. His next task is to find the real culprit. Ben plans to apply for a job at Unified Dynamics to uncover the truth. The application goes smoothly, and Ben officially becomes an employee of the company. However, he didn't expect that this company is just a branch of Unified Dynamics, and he doesn't have the authority to access the central office. However, he damages his own card on purpose, and taking advantage of his superior's trust, he manages to borrow his card to enter the central office. Inside the office, Ben finds a professor named Fiona, who was also a passenger on the same plane. Clearly, she's working for Unified Dynamics. Fiona specializes in neuropsychology. Her idea is to link everyone's brains to share information, which sounds astonishing. This is exactly what's happening with Cal and Marco. Marco is being forced to undergo various experiments, and Cal can feel everything as if he's experiencing it himself. Ben decides to talk to Professor Fiona, but when he mentions the 11 missing passengers, Fiona appears clueless. She is only researching neuropsychology and has no connection to official detainment or experimentation. Fiona then recalls that after their return, an organization did approach her, funding her research project. But she never saw any government officials. The organization's name is the Singularity Project, which is actually part of Unified Dynamics, a name Ben had seen at work. Upon returning, Jared grows worried about Michaela. Her actions are inexplicable and she's not opening up to him, which deeply concerns him. During their conversation, a shooting incident takes place not far away. A store has been robbed and the owner couldn't be saved. The only person left is a young man named Carlos, who was raised by the store owner. Later, Michaela and her team apprehend a few suspects and ask Carlos to identify them. However, Carlos is timid and too scared to speak up. Michaela doesn't want to give up. She believes there's something special about Carlos. She takes the initiative to visit his home, trying to persuade him to help, but to no avail. Carlos simply lacks the courage to step forward. Just when it seems the case will stall, Carlos comes forward the next day. With his identification, the suspect is identified. When Michaela and Jared go to make the arrest in the street, Michaela seems to receive a premonition. Without seeing anyone, she intuitively knows where the suspect will appear. At this moment, the suspect is planning to rob an elderly person. Michaela, driven by some inexplicable guidance, finds Carlos. The sound of a heartbeat leads her forward. Carlos is indeed special. He knows Michaela's bestie, who had died in the car accident. It turns out, Michaela's bestie had donated her heart to Carlos for a transplant surgery, a connection that seems to tie them together in mysterious ways. Meanwhile, in order to uncover the truth, Ben intentionally approaches a colleague at Unified Dynamics. He takes advantage of the man's absence while changing clothes to quickly copy the farm's data onto a USB stick. Unbeknownst to Ben, all of this is seen by Agent Robert, who seems to understand a lot more now. As Ben prepares to leave work, Robert contacts him via text asking for the USB stick or else he'll be arrested. Ben has no choice but to hand it over. When he gets home, Ben feels guilty towards Cal. In his effort to save his son, he's exhausted all means, but the data has been taken by the agent. Unexpectedly, though, Cal says Robert isn't bad, at least not now, and Ben can trust him completely. Now, Cal seems to have some kind of prophetic ability, being able to foresee impending events. The drawings on the fridge are proof enough. Cal doesn't know Carlos, yet he can draw his picture. It's truly incredible. In fact, ever since they returned from the flight, Cal has been saying he doesn't want to stay in this city. He feels he's going to die. In an underground lab, the captured 11 passengers are moved. The next 48 hours will continue with experiments. Due to interference from Robert, their progress has significantly slowed. The next day, as Ben is at work at Unified Dynamics, a fire alarm goes off at the company. As he prepares to leave, Robert passes by quickly. It turns out the fire alarm was a diversion created by Robert, who has something to discuss with Ben. Now, they need to help each other. Robert then smashes Ben's phone and gives him a new one for safer communication. Just as one wave of trouble recedes, another follows. Michaela and her team receive a distress call. Someone is threatening to jump off a building. This old man, Harvey, was also a survivor of the flight. He says everything has changed since he returned. His house is gone, his family is missing, and life has lost its meaning. He says the surviving passengers are dying one after another, and it's his turn now. After speaking, he jumps. Michaela is devastated. She feels there's an issue with Harvey's statement about people constantly dying, but it's too late to question him now. That morning, Michaela had a voice in her head urging her not to lose him. She thought it referred to Jared, but now it seems it was about Harvey. This mysterious voice is making Michaela more and more fearful. After returning to the company, Ben was able to access some data. He believed that Unified Dynamics was duplicating certain data. Professor Fiona was utterly shocked when she heard about this. They were planning on artificially replicating consciousness, making all strangers share one brainwave. This was a theory proposed by Fiona herself, but she only ever experimented on lab rats. All of them ended up dead. Ben wanted to get to the bottom of this through Robert, but he had no idea how. Robert gave him a listening device, asking Fiona to find an opportunity to place it in the central office. When Fiona arrived at the Singularity Project office with the listening device, she was interrupted by a subordinate after only speaking a few words with the head of the project. The subordinate said that they had discovered that Unified Dynamics data had been downloaded in large amounts. The person responsible was Ben. Fortunately, the listening device had been installed. While the head was on the phone, he revealed the location of the 11 passengers. He also mentioned the word Major, implying that the Major was the true mastermind behind everything. Agent Robert didn't know who the Major was. There were hundreds of Majors in the military, but with a confirmed location of the 11 passengers, things would be a lot easier moving forward. Meanwhile, Michaela and Jared visited Harvey's house. They found the words, "I am Angel of Death," written on the wall, and several newspapers on the table. All the people featured in the newspapers had already died. They knew Harvey often went to bars, so the two went to a bar to ask the bar owner but did not obtain any useful clues. That night, when Michaela returned home, she received a text from Jared. Something had happened at the bar Harvey frequented. A bartender had been electrocuted. Up to this point, Harvey had shared the voices in his head with 3 people, and all 3 of them were now dead. Someone must be pulling the strings in the background, perhaps the Angel of Death written on the wall. Michaela becomes increasingly worried. Passengers who returned from the plane are dying in various accidents. She does not want to lose Jared. No matter how much he asks, she refuses to speak. She is extremely upset. She loves Jared, but Jared is now her friend's husband. This pain is indescribable. On Robert's side, he found the exact address of the lab through extensive investigation. Little did he know the NSA was also behind all this. They were conducting unknown experiments under the guise of private enterprises. Robert's investigation has greatly slowed the lab's progress, but now everything is ready. It's time to restart the experiments. On the other side, Cal has been quite relaxed since he returned home. He even plays basketball with Ben. At this moment, a woman walks up to them. Her name is Autumn, and she was also a passenger on the plane. She says the passengers have been subjected to various experiments and are always in a daze, but she got the chance to escape when they were changing locations. After her escape, Autumn found Ben through telepathy. Knowing that, Ben did not dare to delay and immediately contacted Michaela and others. Fiona was very shocked when she saw the experimented Autumn. She didn't expect the Major to actually do such a thing, forcibly using electrotherapy to test on the passenger's brain. The original intention of her research on this project was to benefit mankind. She didn't expect someone to use it for evil. At this moment, Robert finally understood what was going on. When the plane reappeared after disappearing for 5 years, everyone on board had gained psychic abilities. This ability allows them to sense upcoming events. There has always been a voice guiding them to do certain things. Cal has the strongest sense. At this point, Ben can't wait any longer. He decides to destroy the lab immediately because he can't let his son suffer anymore. Robert is responsible for leading the team there. The experiment had already begun on this side. This time, they turned up the voltage. The moment the switch was pressed, everyone started to have headaches. Shortly after, Agent Robert arrived with armed personnel along with Ben and his team. But after searching everywhere, they couldn't find any abnormalities. It was just an empty factory. The group began arguing. Ben was certain it was here, but now, not a trace could be found. At that moment, Cal walked over and told Ben that the lab was indeed here, as his drawing was of this place. Cal's prophetic abilities were always accurate. The entrance was between 2 trees. Sure enough, they found an entrance beneath a wall. Cal insisted that Ben go in with the team because he was the only one who could see them. Ben didn't have time to think. It was time to trust his son. When everyone reached the basement and went through numerous corridors, they finally found the lab. A gunfight ensued. Seeing this, the person in charge immediately ordered a retreat. They took all the data, destroyed what they couldn't take, and activated the strongest current. They shot up all the control panels. By the time Robert and his team arrived, it was too late. The perpetrators had long escaped. The switch was broken. They could only manually disconnect all the tubes. The escapees were eventually caught by Robert and Jared. During their escape, they got lost. Only Ben could see the lights, others couldn't. This was why Cal had him come. Robert and Jared weren't so lucky. Without Ben's guidance, they got lost. Meanwhile, a fire ignited the oxygen tank, causing a violent explosion. Even Ben, who was already outside, was left dazed by the explosion. When he got up, he saw a peacock that disappeared in a blink. Michaela was frantic. This battle had freed the captured people but completely destroyed the lab. Jared was seriously injured, and Robert was killed on the spot. Michaela cried her heart out. She had always loved Jared and didn't want him to die. Things weren't easy for Ben either. Grace blamed him for taking Cal to a dangerous place and completely lost faith in him. In her eyes, Ben's actions since he came back weren't those of a sane person. She didn't believe in things like psychic powers and drove Ben out of the house. Cal bid his father a reluctant farewell. He knew that even if he spoke now, his mother wouldn't believe him. It wouldn't be good for anyone, so he decided to stay silent. Jared finally woke up after treatment. He regretted what happened to Agent Robert. So many things had happened. Michaela had been following the voice in her head, whether it was right or wrong. In the end, it led to many deaths. Ben thought they should stop listening to the voice in their heads. It would only drag them into danger, but Michaela disagreed. After learning the lab was destroyed, Autumn sincerely apologized to Ben and the others. After everyone left, Autumn took out a cell phone from her shoe and sent a text out. It turned out she was a mole sent by the person in charge of the lab to investigate what Ben was up to and bring him down at an opportune time. After the 11 passengers returned, they fell into a vegetative state. Dr. Sanvi thought this was some sort of after effect, which could potentially trigger other disasters. Ever since the lab was utterly destroyed, Ben always felt that things were far from over, but he just couldn't figure it out. At Robert's memorial, Ben met a podcaster who had a significant following online. The podcaster was currently focusing on reporting about Flight 828, and he knew why the Major walked out of the lab 1 hour before the lab exploded. It was all a conspiracy. The Major was still at large, and things were far from over. Meanwhile, Michaela had another vision when she touched a man named Paul. This time, the voice in her head even showed her an image of a snowstorm and instructed her to find her. Suddenly, Paul woke up. Strangely, he didn't remember anything, not even his own name. Since Paul had a wife, Michaela thought that the voice might be guiding her to find his wife. Having screwed up a few times before, she wasn't sure whether to trust the voice or not. At this time, the pilot of Flight 828 found Ben. He always believed that all this was Professor Fiona's doing. That damn experiment was just to make her theory a reality. The pilot also said that many were bound to die in the process, and now everyone was blaming him. He really wanted to prove that it wasn't operational error that caused the disaster, but Ben didn't think so. It was clear that Fiona was also used by the Major. Later, Ben learned from Autumn that the Major was looking for the Holy Grail. She didn't know what this Holy Grail was, but the Major was willing to pay any price for it, which showed how important it was. After talking with Ben, Autumn threw away the phone she used to contact contact the other party. Ben had always been suspicious of Autumn's activities. It wasn't until he heard the podcaster mention the Holy Grail on the radio that he realized how serious things were. He immediately found the podcaster to gather some details. The podcaster said that the incident of Flight 828 not only affected over 100 passengers, but when the flight reappeared, an emergency meeting was called by the officials. Some clues pointed to the Holy Grail. In that case, Agent Robert was just a pawn of the officials. Then why did they send out the Major? Things seemed to be getting more complicated. Over at Michaela's, she followed the voice's call and found Paul's wife. She then discovered that their relationship was far from simple. Paul often abused his wife, and the wife was very fearful of Paul, which is why she didn't go to see him. It turned out that the voice in Michaela's head was not referring to Paul's wife. Ben, wanting to find out who the Major was, went directly to Robert's colleague and asked him to find out where the helicopter had gone an hour before the explosion. It was clear that Robert was killed by the Major. The oxygen tank was deliberately placed by them. Not long after, the colleague called and found out where the helicopter went and that it would be in New York soon. Clearly, the Major's movements were becoming more frequent. He advised Ben to prioritize safety above all else. After listening, Ben went to the podcaster and told him about all their experiences since they returned. He asked the podcaster not to broadcast it yet and wait for the right time. It was like leaving a way out for himself. The voice in Michaela's mind became clearer. A man's hand was bracing against the snowy ground, constantly calling out for someone to find him. Strangely, only Michaela received this signal. No one else reacted. Meanwhile, Robert's colleague was only a few steps away from his home after work when he was taken away by a group of mysterious people. He was arrested. It turned out Ben was being monitored at all times. Elsewhere, Sanvi figured out that the Holy Grail wasn't an object, but referring to a test subject. This test subject had to have a powerful sense of intuition. With this in mind, it seemed that the Major was looking for Ben's son, Cal. Throughout it all, Cal had the strongest intuition. He could sketch out events about to happen. If the Major represented the authorities, why were they looking for Cal? It was certain that there would be no good outcome. Ben had been staying with Cal these past few days, fearing that something would happen to him. Grace's attitude towards Ben had changed a lot. She was busy the next day and needed Ben to take care of their son for the day. But Cal said that someone from the plane needed their father's care. Ben was confused by this statement. Just like her brother Ben, Michaela's vision of the snowstorm was becoming clearer. To avoid Jared, she deliberately changed her working hours. She didn't want to put his wife in a difficult position. Ben was continuously thinking about Cal's words, wondering which person on the plane needed his help. He was just chatting with Michaela when the pilot of Flight 828 called. It turned out that since their return, most people blamed the pilot for the plane's disappearance for 5 years. They thought it was his operational error. So the pilot had always wanted to prove that he encountered unusual lightning at the time. He had never encountered such a thing in his many years of flying. In short, the pilot wanted to simulate the lightning storm he had encountered. Through extensive research, he had simulated the event many times, but always without success. This time, he wanted Ben to be a witness. The pilot also discovered that the authorities had been covering up the weather facts since the day their plane disappeared. The reason for this was yet to be discovered. Now, Ben finally understood whom Cal was referring to. It was the pilot. Unfortunately, this experiment wasn't successful. Afterwards, through extensive investigation, Ben discovered that in 2014, the authorities sent out a meteorological expert to reveal the truth about the plane's disappearance. Strangely, this meteorologist never showed up. Therefore, Ben and the pilot found this expert to ask him about the truth back then. The expert stated that someone forbade him from telling the truth. But after Ben's earnest plea, the expert finally opened up. It turned out they had encountered black lightning that year. This type of lightning could release a large amount of electrical radiation. If one came into contact with this lightning, it might lead to something similar to time travel. However, this was just a theoretical conclusion drawn by the expert. After the authorities learned of this phenomenon, they asked him not to disclose it. All inexplicable phenomena had to be concealed. Ben asked the expert for some data because now the passengers who came back from the plane were all threatened. But the expert neither agreed nor refused. Unable to do anything, the two had to simulate the test again. This time, the lightning storm finally appeared. The pilot operated as he did at that time, trying to see what would happen if he attempted to go through it. But they failed again. They simulated it many times, but it was always unsuccessful. Over on Autumn's side, she takes advantage of the time when Michaela is with Cal to pay a visit. Her motives unclear. Michaela is completely unaware of her betrayal. During this time, Ben calls. Autumn watches Michaela throughout the call, afraid to miss even a small detail. Later, Ben finds Professor Fiona and tells her about the Black Lightning. Fiona believes that they have indeed time traveled, but she has been unable to find any evidence. This is not the pilot's fault, nor is it anyone else's. As for why the authorities are involved, she doesn't know either. On Michaela's side, she discovers that the expert they contacted earlier has suddenly died and immediately informs Ben. It's clear that someone knows he's investigating the truth and is willing to kill anyone related to Ben. They worry about the pilot, rush to his house and find no one there, only clues left by the pilot. It's revealed that there is a storm today, so the pilot decides to try again and takes Fiona with him. If successful, he can prove his innocence. If he fails, then he's finished. Anyway, living has no meaning for him anymore. Taking advantage of his former position, the pilot steals a large airplane. Fiona is speechless. All of this has nothing to do with her. She pleads with the pilot to let her go, but the pilot is already crazy and listens to no one. The authorities quickly dispatch 2 fighter jets to pursue them. The pilot is ultimately shot down before reaching the center of the storm, and both Fiona and the pilot are killed on the spot. Meanwhile, the mole Autumn takes advantage of everyone's absence, flips through a large amount of data, and takes pictures to send to someone. She also tears a page from Cal's sketchbook. When she returns, Michaela is puzzled, wondering why the authorities could learn about the pilot's actions so quickly and dispatch 2 fighter jets to shoot him down. As she's talking to Ben, she suddenly notices an item on the table. She understands everything. It was Autumn who betrayed them. On the other side, Grace checks for her son Cal, but finds that he has disappeared. If he's taken by the Major's men, he'll stay in the lab forever. She immediately calls the police, but strangely, they suspect Ben is responsible. Michaela is also furious, finding Autumn and berating her for her betrayal. They've been harboring her, and now she has done such a thing. She immediately arrests Autumn and rushes to Ben's house. In a mysterious office, a person in charge is checking the surveillance. From the conversation, it's known that he is one of the Major's men, but they did not take Cal. Among the police at Ben's house, there are his spies. At this time, Ben senses something wrong. Perhaps the police are the Major's men because normally it should be the people from Michaela's police station handling the case, not those from other branches. Grace is confused by his words and doesn't understand anything about the Major and the police. With Michaela's help, he says that the voices they can hear are strongest from Cal. At this time, Grace finally believes in Ben and no longer thinks he's crazy. When they look at Cal's sketch, a miraculous scene occurs. The scene of the 3 of them facing the sketch was already drawn by Cal. They are momentarily speechless with surprise. Maybe the sketchbook is the key to saving Cal. As they continue to flip through, they find Cal is inside a house with several mountains and trees. But one page has been taken by someone, likely the mole Autumn. Suddenly, Grace recognizes one of the places and prepares to leave immediately. To avoid raising the police's suspicion, she falsely claims to have found Cal and sends all the police away. Afterward, they split into 2 groups. Ben and Grace go to find their son Cal, while Michaela interrogates Autumn. It turns out that the Major has been threatening Autumn all along, using her daughter as a chip. As long as she works for the Major, her daughter will be safe. Moreover, the torn page is a portrait of Autumn and her daughter. Cal knew from the beginning that Autumn was the bad guy. He just never said anything. Meanwhile, Cal's older sister Olive remembers something. When they were children, she and Cal often played a game of hiding notes. After some searching, she indeed finds a clue and sees a note that says, "I left," because Cal knew that if he didn't leave, his family would suffer. Olive sends the note to their parents. Meanwhile, the Major's team has spotted Cal in their surveillance footage. He's headed to a certain mountain range, on a route similar to the one Ben is currently traveling. It's a race to see who finds Cal first. As he enters the forest, a car continuously tails him. However, for some unknown reason, after covering a distance, they turn around and leave. Thinking that they might have found Cal, Ben quickly follows. By a lakeside cabin, the Major's team has already arrived. Upon opening the door, they find no trace of Cal. The tip was a ruse provided by Autumn. It seems she has decided to amend her ways. Michaela naturally gives Autumn her daughter's address, and everything falls into place. At this point, Autumn is filled with regret and offers her sincere apology. Michaela takes hold of a note. On the back is Cal's hiding place. She immediately sends it to Ben and Grace. Through various clues, they finally locate the place on the map. Soon, they arrive at the cabin. Sure enough, Cal is inside. Just as they prepare to take Cal home, he insists on not returning. He says he's coming soon, but who this he is, Cal can't clarify. He only knows that this person can help them. Just as he's explaining, a man rushes in and then faints. This is the man Cal was talking about. The Major's men fail to find Cal. When reporting, the major, who is a woman, says there's no hurry now. She believes that everything will come to her, she just needs to wait patiently. Ben is puzzled. This man wasn't a passenger on the plane, so why would Cal say he's important? They can only wait for him to wake up to find out. Later, Michaela also arrives. Upon seeing the man's clothes, she instantly understands that this is the same man in the blizzard shown up in her mind. He's also wearing a red coat. As they're talking, the man wakes up. Upon opening his eyes, he recognizes Michaela and says, "So it's you," leaving Michaela and the others confused. His name is Zeke. He was caught in a sudden blizzard while mountain climbing and got trapped in a cave due to a lack of equipment. Zeke was about to give up on living, but seeing Michaela's magazine gave him the will to survive. Michaela was his motivation. The subsequent conversation turns everyone's understanding upside down. Zeke says he's only been gone for 2 weeks. He went mountain climbing in December 2017, and the magazine was also from December 2017. But now it's December 2018, which means Zeke was trapped in the mountain for a year. Everyone is stunned. Ben decides to take him back to the city, but Zeke refuses, believing that a man like him who's been missing for a year could bring trouble if he suddenly appears in public. Michaela wants to unravel the mystery surrounding Zeke, so she decides to stay with him. Ben, intending to figure out who Zeke really is, brings a blood-stained handkerchief. If Zeke turns out to be a mole sent by the major, that would be disastrous. As things have progressed to this point, the passengers who disappeared for 5 years and then returned are becoming a harbinger of disaster in people's mouths. Some people even begin to hype up this topic, and the situation continues to worsen. Crossroads are marked with large red crosses. Once they return home, someone even smashes their window and hurls abuse. What's worse, Ben's front door also gets sprayed with a large red cross. This makes it impossible for them to live a normal life. While Michaela was chatting with Zeke, an accidental touch sent them both into a different realm. The phrase, "let's go back," came to mind for both of them. Michaela speculated that they were being guided back to the cave. Later, when Michaela went to the market to buy exploration gear, the shop owner revealed a secret unknown to most. Zeke's sister had died in a cave while mountain climbing in 2016. This revelation made Michaela understand why Zeke wanted to climb the mountain. Afterwards, Zeke took her to the cave, which seemed ordinary. They had hoped to find some clues about the plane's disappearance, but came away disappointed. However, another unintentional touch made the images in their minds grow clearer. If it wasn't the cave, then where could it be? What did those stars represent? Zeke thought for a moment and then said that it might have something to do with his sister. The necklace he wore was a gift to his sister, and he had worn it ever since she passed away. He hadn't visited the place where she was buried since her death. Perhaps this was the meaning behind the voice in their minds. They needed to visit her burial site. Upon Michaela's persuasion, the two visited his sister's burial site for the first time and left the necklace there. They thought everything was over until the illusion appeared again during their farewell embrace, this time accompanied by thunder and lightning. After consulting with each other, they decided to return to the city to investigate. As they were walking, Michaela struggled to keep up. When Zeke kindly took her hand, they noticed an image of 2 people holding hands on the wall. Then there was a flash of lightning. On the other hand, Olive finally learned about her father's situation, the ability to see things that others can't. Ben had been afraid of implicating his daughter in the past, but now that she knew, he felt relieved. Maybe she could even help in a crucial moment. Soon after, Dr. Sanvi came to find Ben. She had detected anomalies in Zeke's blood, the same as theirs. So regardless of whether Zeke was on the plane or not, his disappearance and reappearance definitely had some connection. This was because there was a strong earthquake when Zeke was mountain climbing, and there was also black lightning, which could make him time travel. Officer Jared finally caught the person who had been smashing windows. However, since the damage wasn't severe, they couldn't press charges. They could only detain the person. Jared also discovered that this person had created a website specifically for reporting on the plane crash and defaming Ben and his family. The situation was complicated, and they couldn't do much to retaliate. Ben, frustrated, returned home to find his daughter's book on the floor. Picking it up, he noticed it was a peacock, similar to the one he saw when he destroyed the lab. Olive explained that the peacock symbolized resurrection and immortality in ancient times. Ben wondered if all this was the work of some divine entity, but decided to ignore that. After the window smasher had been released, Ben visited the offender's territory and warned him not to harass his family anymore or he would face the consequences. Unbeknownst to him, all this was recorded and uploaded to their website. Ben was immediately subjected to online abuse. If it wasn't for Jared's help, his house might have been torn down. The hatred was not only towards Ben, but also Sanvi. Her front door was marked with a large red cross, severely disrupting their lives. Michaela brought Zeke back to her place. Since Zeke had nowhere else to go, he temporarily moved in with her. She advised Zeke to keep a low profile as people harbored resentment towards the passengers who had disappeared and returned. Adrian, another passenger from Flight 828, started a church named the Church of the Returned, claiming to be a miracle disseminator. He claimed that as long as you listened with sincerity in the church, good fortune would naturally come. Of course, none of this was free. One day, just as Sanvi started work, a woman named Alice came looking for her. Alice said her husband was suffering from an incurable disease and asked Sanvi to visit her home. Strictly speaking, Sanvi was a scientist and had nothing to do with being a doctor. But Alice insisted on inviting Sanvi because she was a returnee from the plane. Unable to refuse, Sanvi went with her. Upon arrival, Sanvi had no way of treating Alice's husband and could only offer comforting words. Unexpectedly, Alice turned hostile, brandishing a gun and insisting that Sanvi must cure her husband or she wouldn't be allowed to leave alive. Sanvi was terrified. Jared has been quite bothered recently. He's always had feelings for Michaela and is hoping for a reconciliation. However, Michaela is not willing. Despite her love for Jared, he's now the husband of her friend, so she believes it's wrong to steal someone's love. A few nights ago, driven by impulsive passion, they committed an indiscretion, which their mutual friend discovered. The friend was heartbroken and, despite her closeness to Michaela, decided to leave. That night, she left home and never returned. Michaela was inconsolably sad. Ben came looking for Sanvi to understand the latest situation, but found no one. He found only a leaflet on the floor from the Church of the Returned. Enraged, he confronted Adrian, questioning his actions. Isn't this pushing everyone to the brink of death? Adrian dismissed his concerns, feeling he was only making money and that their members willingly contributed. Ben then found Alice's address on the flyer and immediately went there with Michaela, using the excuse that they could cure her husband's illness. Michaela waited for the right moment, and finally, they managed to subdue Alice, rescuing the injured Sanvi. No sooner had this matter been resolved, the police station received a call. An armored vehicle carrying $75 million had plunged into the river, and despite 2 days of searching, there was no result. Meanwhile, Zeke has been having visions of a wolf and wanted to discuss it with Cal. However, Cal seemed reluctant and unusually fearful. Zeke persisted, pleading with Cal, who feared that if he drew it, it would happen and end up a tragedy, because Cal also saw the wolf. Under Zeke's incessant persuasion, he finally drew it. Everyone was shocked when a wolf burst out of the room and Michaela was just outside the door. At the same time, Michaela was staking out the sunken armored car. After 3 days and nights, the vehicle was finally brought up. The moment she opened the door, the driver lunged at her like a wild wolf. The news created a stir. Normally, a person without oxygen and water would be bloated after 3 days, but this guy seemed alive and perfectly fine. Michaela suspected this was related to their missing airplane. Zeke and Ben also arrived at the hospital. Jared and Zeke met for the first time, but they seemed to not get along. Sanvi calculated the time from when the driver plunged into the river until he was rescued. It was precisely 82 hours and 8 minutes, coinciding strangely with their flight number 828. At this moment, the driver woke up, shouting for them to stay away and to leave immediately. The crowd was confused. The driver then dropped another bombshell, warning of an airplane explosion. Michaela was convinced this guy was not ordinary. After checking his records, they found out the driver was called James, a notorious criminal with a history of murder and robbery. When Jared learned that Zeke was staying at Michaela's place, he was unhappy. A stranger had invaded his beloved's home, and he was immediately filled with jealousy. Michaela was awkwardly caught in the middle. Soon, James woke up. Initially, he was confused about everything, but after Michaela explained the situation, he became less frantic. Knowing he was carrying a criminal charge, this was his last lifeline. He wouldn't reveal the location of the explosion unless granted an official pardon. He also mentioned this explosion would cause massive casualties. This posed a dilemma. Releasing a hardened criminal could be disastrous, but refusing him could lead to even greater damage from the explosion. Since they believed his words before he passed out were true, and given that Michaela and the others often had such visions, they tried their best to coax information out of James. They investigated his background thoroughly, but James didn't care. Not until Olive found his brother, who had a close relationship with James, but had betrayed him for personal gain. This had always been a pain in James's heart. On Zeke's side, he arrived at a house and spent a while searching for the key at the front door, but to no avail. Just as he was about to break in, the police arrived and caught him. Officer Jared now had a handle on Zeke and was ready to give him a hard time. However, Michaela spoke up for Zeke, refusing to believe he was that kind of person. Later, during questioning, they discovered Zeke was trying to enter his mother's home. His mother had always neglected him, making him feel like an orphan. After understanding the situation, Michaela let him go, leaving Jared fuming with anger. Feeling helpless, he decided to do something. He couldn't let Zeke steal Michaela away. Since James kept withholding the truth, the FBI had no choice but to release him without charge, fulfilling his demand. In return, James kept his promise and revealed the exact location of the bomb, hidden under a street stall. If it exploded, many lives would be lost. After the bomb was defused, Michaela still felt the calling of the wolf in her mind. She felt that it was not over yet. When the news of James's release was made public, there was an uproar among the public. However, they didn't target the authorities. Instead, they saw James as a hero. Some TV stations even invited James to give a talk. The situation was scandalous. Jared secretly investigated Zeke and indeed found a criminal record. But Michaela still thought Jared was being unreasonable. Being jealous was one thing, but this was too much. Jared was left fuming. At that moment, everyone's minds were filled with the words, "Stop him," which seemed to warn them that James was about to do something terrible. Meanwhile, Cal had a premonition, but when Ben and Grace asked him about it, he refused to say anything. He could only tell Zeke. When Zeke found him, Cal counter-asked if there was a way to stop it. It was clear this matter was very serious. Zeke could not give an answer. In the end, Cal plucked up the courage to show Zeke a drawing. There were 3 tombstones for Ben, Cal, and Michaela. Cal panicked, now knowing how to tell his father they were doomed. Zeke didn't tell them about it. He couldn't bring himself to say it. Now the released James was a celebrity, preparing to appear on a TV show. Michaela ran over to persuade him not to reveal the visions to the public, as it would only lead to more deaths. They had experienced this before. Anyone who knew the full extent of the visions died. However, James was indifferent. He was only interested in making money. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned around, an accident happened. He died on the spot. The coroner determined the cause of death to be drowning, which seemed strange enough. Ben wanted to ask Sanvi's opinion, but Sanvi said that someone already knew about the anomaly in their blood. If the medical community found out about Cal's blood, they would definitely try to capture him for various studies. The situation was going beyond control. Suddenly, Michaela heard the voice in her mind saying, "Stop him" again. She felt that Zeke was in danger because Jared had been targeting him these days. At the same time, Ben also found an important clue. James had stayed underwater for 82 hours and 8 minutes, and his time of death from being rescued from underwater to drowning was also exactly 82 hours and 8 minutes. This suggested that there was an expiration date for the time of death. Were Ben and the other passengers the same? Ben immediately started calculating. Before he finished, Olive blurted out, "The 2nd of June, 2024. Grace couldn't believe it, but Ben's calculation also resulted in the 2nd of June, 2024. Olive didn't want to tell Cal because he was still young. However, she was wrong. Cal already knew their date of death. It seemed that those who returned from the plane were destined to die. At this point, Ben decided to take his family away to enjoy the rest of their days. Just then, Grace dropped a bombshell, saying that she was pregnant, but the child was not Ben's. It was her new husband's. For the 5 years that Ben was missing, the man had been living in this house. On the other side, Officer Jared followed Zeke home, intending to find the contraband Zeke was hiding. All he found was a bottle of alcohol, but Jared used this as an excuse to make a big deal out of it. He was determined to drive Zeke away from Michaela. During the process, a conflict broke out between the two. Driven to his limit, Zeke pulled out a handgun and aimed it at Jared. Seeing an opportunity, Jared grappled with Zeke in an attempt to seize the gun. They both fought fiercely to gain control over the weapon. At the crucial moment, Michaela rushed back home. With that, the first season of this drama comes to an end. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.